What's going on, everybody? Ash here, and I just recently had a chance to go hands-on with the upcoming Pokemon mobile game that was just recently announced, Pokemon Masters. We actually got to play about 45 minutes of it and participate in a group interview with the producer of Pokemon Masters, Yu Sasaki. And I wanted to share, kind of consolidate 5 things I learned about the game through the course of all that. Now, you may have already noticed that we do already have a full preview discussion up. Derek and I recorded a full preview discussion, which you can go check out right now on the channel. It's up, and so if you've seen that, some of the information here will be repeated. It's not all going to be new to you. However, some of it will be. We weren't able to cover every single factoid in the preview discussion, so if you've already seen it, some of this will be new, some of this won't be. And if you haven't seen the preview discussion, I highly encourage you to go check it out after you're done here. And with that, let's get started. Number 1. The original concept for Pokemon Masters, its development, and its intended audience. So, the game's original concept was actually provided by Ken Sugimori, who wanted to showcase all the trainers we've seen to date. Sugimori actually thought it would be very interesting to see trainers from different generations interact, and to see what kind of drama would occur when that happens. So, definitely the focus here is on the trainers. Of course, the Pokemon are always important, but there is a particular focus here on the trainers coming from different generations and that crossover element of seeing how they would interact together. Now, in terms of the actual development, it might surprise you to learn that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company actually had nothing to do with Pokemon Masters' actual development. Now, the basis for development, in terms of planning meetings and such, those were a collaboration between the Pokemon Company, Game Freak, and the game's developer DNA, but DNA actually handled all the development itself, so the game was developed entirely in-house at DNA. Now, the game is targeting both a hardcore returning audience as well as a completely new or casual audience to Pokemon. The draw for hardcore and returning fans, according to DNA, is to see all these trainers from different generations interacting with one another for the first time, as I said before. Think examples like Brock interacting with Steven, from Generation 3, or Misty interacting with Cynthia, for example, stuff like that, dream crossovers in Pokemon that you might otherwise never see. Now, on the other hand, the gameplay in Pokemon Masters is actually primarily oriented toward newcomers because of these, the completely new 3v3 real-time battle system, as well as some of the simplified mechanics that come with it, such as Pokemon now being limited, or I should say sync pairs, being limited to a single type rather than dual types, which means you'll only ever have to worry about one weakness when going up against, enemies or opponents, as opposed to dual weaknesses, things like that. That might upset hardcore players, but this is because DNA wants to appeal to a broad audience with Masters. And part of that, understandably, is not requiring players to come into Masters with things like the type matchup chart, and other stuff like that memorized, various, added effects and the type matchup. You don't need to go into Pokemon Masters with any of that memorized, and that's entirely on purpose, because in general, DNA wants to bring a different Pokemon experience into play. Number 2, the 3v3 real-time battle system and its origins. So, the 3v3 real-time battle system in Pokemon Masters is largely informed and inspired by DNA's desire for the game to have co-op multiplayer, and it actually might not have turned out that way at all if co-op wasn't such an element. So, the producer and DNA repeatedly stressed to me that the battle system is the way it is because of the co-op element. That was always a very strong aspect of development and something they wanted to do from the very beginning, and they more or less designed the battle system to work around that. So the battle system's format is 3v3 to obviously encourage the co-op aspect of teaming up with 2 friends to take on AI opponents. Now, that is just AI opponents. Unfortunately, there is no PvP, and the reason for that is kind of the same concept, which is with Masters, they really want to encourage the idea of teamwork and working together and synergizing your attacks and such with your 2 partners. So that's the reason they decided not to have PvP in the game. And the battle system is real-time because the team felt that a turn-based format would kind of undercut co-op in the sense that players would get bored waiting for their teammates and their opponents to take their turns, which I can kind of see that. Imagine, having to wait for both, your 2 teammates and all 3 opponents in a co-op battle to take their turns every round. That would take a long time, and so it does make sense that they went with a real-time format for this battle system in light of that. Number 3, the player's sync pair Pokemon. The player's sync pair Pokemon, as in your sync pair Pokemon when you play the game, will always be Pikachu, and that can't be changed at least at launch. Maybe down the road, again, that's my own speculation, but at least at launch, you cannot have any Pokemon other than Pikachu for your player character's sync pair. And so that may be disappointing to those of you who maybe wanted to, pick a Pokemon that you personally vibe with, that you really, really like, one of your favorites, or at least work up to the point where you can do that. But unfortunately, it sounds like Pikachu is it, and there is no word yet on if the player's Pikachu can be evolved or not. That was something they didn't commit to in terms of answering that question. So we don't know that yet, but it is, the player's sync pair Pokemon is always Pikachu, and this actually is not due to a decision by DNA, but rather it was on the recommendation by the Pokemon Company that because Pikachu is, Pokemon's most widely recognizable mascot, that just for the ease of new players getting into the game or for, familiarity and comfort reasons, the Pokemon Company basically suggested have the player's partner Pokemon always be Pikachu. So I could see that being a good or a bad thing depending on, how into Pokemon you are, but there it is, and your mileage may vary on that. Number 4, monetization. So, some of you will be very happy, or probably most of you will be very happy to learn that the game's monetization is actually quite conservative. The only premium purchases in the whole game will be new sync pairs, meaning a new pair of a trainer and their Pokemon. And, like with Fire Emblem Heroes, for example, you can still earn the premium currency that you need to buy these sync pairs. You can earn them in-game without spending any money, but obviously the going will be a little bit slower, and you will obviously be able to buy more sync pairs faster if you decide to spend money. However, it isn't required, and that is the only aspect of the game that is monetized. And by that, I mean that all Pokemon enhancement and development is actually handled with currency that can only be earned in-game. So that means you'll never have to spend money to level up your Pokemon, teach them new moves, evolve them, things like that. And basically the reason for that is kind of what you might expect. DNA said that they understand that this game's and Pokemon in general's core audience is children, and they realize that there's a different line that maybe should not be crossed when monetizing a mobile game that will primarily be played by kids. So, if this was Fire Emblem or something geared toward an older audience, they might have more aggressively monetized Pokémon Masters. However, because this game's intended audience is kids, they kind of wanted to take a conservative approach there, which I think is probably the right way to go. And, people who play mobile games, I know most of our audience, you want to pay for as little as possible, understandably. So go into Pokemon Masters comfortable in the knowledge that you'll only really need to spend money if you want to, have more of a chance of getting your favorite sync pairs on a particular banner or, something like that. So basically think of sync pairs as a kind of a parallel to new units in Fire Emblem Heroes, where you summon new heroes, and that's basically what you're doing with trying to get new sync pairs, premium sync pairs using real money. Number 5, the setting. So the setting for Pokemon Masters is called Paseo Island, and that was described to me as quote-unquote taking place somewhere in the game/anime world, and that's pretty much it. Those of you who are wondering whether Masters is canon or not, I'm sorry to say that the developers aren't really taking a firm position on that. Whether or not Masters is part of the main series canon is left intentionally vague, and is more or less up to the player. And that's because, while story will be a focus in Masters, that is actually secondary to the core appeal of the crossover element, that I mentioned earlier, of having trainers from different generations interact with one another. So, actually I can say specifically, story is a focus in Pokemon Masters. I got to play a few story battles, see what the story mode is like, and see how it's arranged. And it's actually arranged in a very similar fashion to Fire Emblem Heroes, in the way you select chapters and select battles within those chapters, and things like that. So story is a focus, but not so much of a focus that it would ever overshadow what the team is really all about here, in a setting sense, which is the crossover element of having all these different trainers interact. So that's where the focus is first and foremost. Another reason for Masters taking a somewhat standalone role in the ongoing Pokemon mythos is because DNA understandably didn't want to limit themselves in terms of having to follow conventions established in the games or anime. They really wanted to do their own thing, and they realized that if they too closely hewed to what has already been established in, the existing anime lore, the existing game lore, that would very much limit what they could do in Pokemon Masters. And they really just wanted the freedom to kind of strike out and do their own thing and kind of leave their own stamp on the Pokemon universe. So, there you have it. 5 elements of Pokemon Masters we learned quite a bit about during our demo of the game and the subsequent group interview. And while we're just about done here, we want to know what you think. Are you excited for Pokemon Masters? Are you more hyped for Masters after learning the information in this video, or perhaps less? Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you all that we do have a full preview discussion up on the channel right now, so if you like what you heard here and you want to learn more about Pokemon Masters prior to release, go check out that preview video. So otherwise, let us know what you think about Pokemon Masters in the comments below, and be sure to ring the bell and subscribe to GameXplain for more on Pokemon and all things gaming.